Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much, Cheryl, for agreeing to be here with us today to provide this training on the local plan to the North Region SELPA CAC. I will introduce Cheryl to you briefly. This is just a short bio, but wanted to let you know that Cheryl has worked at the Parent Training and Information Centers at the Disability Rights Education Defense Fund, often known as DREDF, since 2007. She provides training, support, technical assistance to parents, youth, educators, and community stakeholders to increase meaningful participation and collaboration in the special education process. She's engaged in policy and systems change work to improve the outcomes for students with disabilities at the local, state, and federal level. 2 of her 5 children have disabilities. She previously worked at the Stanford Center for Biomedical Ethical, third time's the charm, Biomedical Ethics, researching the impact of stigma on people with genetic disabilities, and as a program manager for a youth transition program. She has a BA in social welfare and a master's degree from UC Berkeley. And you may also recognize her from her participation this year in our CAC meetings. So thank you so much, Cheryl, for being a part of our community and coming Saturday morning to give us your expertise as well.
Thank you, Kelly. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you thumbs up me so I know that I'm not? And Kelly and I have a plan. So if my internet dies, because we've learned that anything that can go wrong will, then she'll take over and has the presentation until I can call in. So I think we have a plan. So good morning. I really want to start with a minute to just appreciate everyone who's on this call this morning. It's been such a difficult year. And whether you're a parent or an educator or a community member, everyone has been so impacted. And I find that people are so stressed and so tired and just wrung out. And of course, families have been doing multiple roles. And I just want to acknowledge how hard it's been for everyone, and that in the midst of that, you're taking time to work on improving the special education system for all children. That's not a small thing, and we really appreciate it. And special thanks to Katie, because her leadership at the SELPA, and we'll talk more about that, has been just ongoing and sustained over time. And she's always so responsive and so approachable when I've had challenges, and is giving up her Saturday to do this too. So thank you, Katie. We really appreciate you. All right,
Cheryl, can I interrupt you again? I'm so sorry. I'm just realizing I needed to officially call this meeting to order. And to say that this is a CAC training meeting, and there will be time left after the presentation for public comments about items not on the agenda. The only agenda item here is training for the CAC on the local plan. And Cheryl and I discussed that our preference would be that if you have questions about the presentation, like clarification questions, please ask them in midstream, because the purpose here is actually for our education to be able to do our duties in terms of advising on the local plan. And then there will be time for discussion and more involved questions for CAC members after public comment about items not on the agenda. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Yeah, no problem. So yes, it's really, to me, it's horribly boring to go through a training where you can't interact. So please pop in. It would be, I think it will just make it better for everyone if it's a little more interactive. I need to always tell you a little bit about our organization. So for those of you who don't know about DREDF, DREDF is a national law and policy disability civil rights organization. Everyone who works at DREDF has a disability or has a child with a disability, or both. For many of us, it's, we double dip. And we work really hard on all kinds of fronts. So we don't just do education. We've done a lot of COVID healthcare work. making sure that people can have their caregivers with them in the hospital, things like that. We do housing work. We do a lot of work on law and policy. People who work at DREDF helped write the Americans with Disabilities Act, were involved in the most recent iteration of what we call the IDEA, the Special Education Law. So it's a great place to work. There's a lot going on. And within our organization, we have a small unit called the Parent Training and Information Center. I always like to remind people that we are actually funded by the U.S. Department of Education. So we're not, a legal firm that's, we don't represent individual people. Our Parent Training and Information Center, our job is to help parents and other people who are concerned about a student or a child with a disability participate in the system, understand their rights, know what to do when things go wrong, understand their options. So we're not giving legal advice. We're helping people understand how the process works, pointing them to the right people, and so on. So the reason we do this work is that it's very clear to us, and there are 4 of us in the Parent Training and Information Center, and we serve 30 counties, so that's why we don't always call you back right away. The reason we do this work is that children who have advocates, whether it's a parent or someone else in their life, tend to have better long-term outcomes. And certainly I see this in my work that, the more involved a parent is, the more you bring your child's voice and strengths and concerns into the process, the better that process works. And also remember that the whole system is built on this idea that every child has a parent to advocate for them, and that's simply not true. So when we do this work together in the CAC, that's part of what we're doing, is we're trying to make the system work better for all children, not just the ones who have us, participating, knocking on the doors, and strongly advocating for our kids. So, and then finally, there is a parent center in every state and territory in the United States. So if you move, or if you know of someone else in another part of the country who's struggling, you can find where their parent center is on this link. And Katie will be sending out the PDF after the training, and it'll be posted so people will be able to have that link. Okay, so let's talk about what we're trying to accomplish. We have lofty goals. First of all, I want to just introduce some basic key vocabulary, and some of you may know this, and I apologize if it's a little boring, but I always feel like we should level the playing field so everybody knows what some of this alphabet soup of special education is. We're going to review the history and purpose of the IDEA in a short little video. It's a little bit dated, but I still really like it. Then we're going to leap right in and talk about what a SELPA is, what the CAC is, what the CAC's role is in terms of the local plan, what the local plan itself is, and then we'll talk about, some of the details of how the local plan is put together and what your advisory role in the process is. Okay, you ready? Okay. So first of all, CAC stands for Community Advisory Committee. All right, so I'm going to use the word CAC, but I just want to remind everyone what that means. And to me, key words there are community. So it's mostly supposed to be parents, but anyone can be involved. And I think the more depth and experience you have, the better. Advisory, meaning, we're not the decision-making body. We are advising the SELPA and bringing parent concerns and community concerns to the SELPA. The CDE is the California Department of Education. That's our state agency that oversees special education and all education. We're going to talk a little bit later about this thing called child find. If you haven't heard this term before, it's actually a part of the federal law that says that districts, and I should say this, that when I say district, I also mean charter schools. They are public schools too. So they districts are required to identify and evaluate children anywhere from birth to age 21 who might need special education and related services, including students who aren't in public school yet. We still, some of you may have had kids who receive services from the district at 3. In California, we have a system where we use regional centers for 0 to 3 for most kids, not all of them, by the way, but I just want to remind you that, we always want to be looking for children who may need this help and identifying them so that we can at least help their parents understand how we might serve them if they were in public school. County Office of Education is just, I'm going to use the term COE, but there you go. Free appropriate public education is FAPE. It's the cornerstone of the law. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but notice that it's at no cost, free. It's appropriate. It doesn't mean you get a Mercedes-Benz, but it means you get an appropriate education. I'll talk about that just a little bit later. Public education. Notice that the word education, it's not the free appropriate public academics. It's free appropriate public education. Education, that's why we include things like social skills and executive functioning and communication and so on, because education is a broad term. LEA is the local education agency, so that's just the school district in our case that our children attend, but it can be a county office of ed, it can be a juvenile hall school, it can be a charter school, and so on. And so sometimes if you're reading some of this fancy ed code, you'll see this term LEA. I just wanted you to know what it is. Many of you have heard the term LRE, least restrictive environment. That's the part of the law that's really important, that says that separate is not equal and that kids have a right to always be included unless for the purposes of serving them, they need something different. And then SELPA stands for Special Education Local Plan Area. We'll get into that more later. And then I've defined a little bit about what a local plan is here. I'm not going to go over it. We'll talk about that later. All right, so I'm going to start by just taking a few minutes to show you a little video about some of the history of special education. I feel like it really helps us understand where we are if we know a little bit about where we came from. So let's make sure this plays. Give me a minute. If you don't hear the sound, please let me know. Can you hear it? All right.
Before 1975, access to an appropriate education was denied for most students with disabilities. Hundreds of thousands of individuals with severe disabilities were housed in state institutions, and schools only educated approximately 1/5 of students with disabilities. In addition, many states had laws that actually prohibited education in regular schools for students with intellectual disabilities, emotional disturbance, or students who were deaf, blind, or both.
Children with disabilities in this time seldom became students. They were characteristically not welcome to the schools. They were, in fact, affirmatively excluded from the schools under laws that required that were adopted in the early 20th century by every state legislature in the Union. Those laws followed shortly after the statutes in every state creating isolated, distant, segregated institutions, public institutions, to house the disabled, as the statutes frequently said, for life.
In 1975, Congress enacted the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, Public Law 94-142. This act articulated a compelling national mission to provide a free, appropriate, public education for all children with disabilities in the least restrictive environment.
Well, it brought to children and adults with disabilities all of the glories of a decent equal citizenship. It turned out that people with disabilities, including significant intellectual disabilities, have, like all human beings, enormous capabilities. With those capabilities supported and freed by the schools, their lives have become thoroughly different. By the late 70s, you could see smiles on the faces of family members of children with disabilities. And you could see in schoolyards all over the country, children playing together. People with disability were no longer isolated and hidden. They were among us and with us and participating and contributing. Many now thought to be uneducable 30, 40 years ago, now attending college and doing very well. Thank you.
The Education for All Handicapped Children Act supported state and localities in protecting the rights and meeting the individual needs of students with disabilities. It indicated specific federal mandates to improve how children with disabilities were identified and educated, to evaluate the success of these efforts, and to provide due process protections for children and families. In 1986, amendments to the Education of All Handicapped Children Act authorized programs for early intervention with infants and toddlers with disabilities. In the 1990s, the law was reauthorized as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, reaffirming the requirements for free, appropriate public education, and strengthening the law's commitment to greater inclusion in community schools, furthering the movement of students with disabilities towards being educated in general education settings. The 1990 amendments also provided for federally sponsored research and supports, which included initiatives for transition services from high school to post-secondary education and adult living for students with disabilities.
Without a doubt, the transition services provision in IDEA is one of its most important components. This provision requires all who are working with students with disabilities to take the long view in the planning process with an eye clearly focused on quality of life outcomes.
In 1997, amendments to IDEA continued to focus on access. The definition of access, however, was broadened to encompass not just physical access to schools, but also access to the general education curriculum, leading to higher academic expectations and greater outcomes for students with disabilities.
The focus must be on instruction that uses individualized approaches for accessing the general education curriculum. Schools support learning and high achievement for all, with increasing opportunities for students with disabilities to be educated to the maximum extent possible alongside their non-disabled classmates.
In 2004, amendments to IDEA increased state and local accountability for educating students with disabilities.
There is no pressure on schools to work hard on behalf of students who are excluded from the accountability system. For this reason, it is important that all students, including all students with disabilities, participate in the state accountability system. And for this reason, IDEA now mandates that students with disabilities be included in all state accountability programs.
In addition, the 2004 amendment included provisions to ensure that special education personnel are highly qualified, to reduce disproportionate representation of minorities in special education, and to expand methods for identifying students with specific learning disabilities and school procedures for disciplining students with disabilities.
Instructional programming and the amount of supports provided are driven by student needs.
In the last 35 years, IDEA has led to improved access, accountability, and achievement for students with disabilities. As of 2008, 95% of students with disabilities were being educated in local neighborhood schools, and almost 6 million students with disabilities were educated in general education classrooms for at least part of the day. Achievement due to IDEA extends beyond K-12 education. For infants and toddlers, the number of children birth to age 5 receiving services under Part C and B of IDEA increased dramatically, and families became part of the planning and education process. Graduation rates for students with disabilities receiving a regular diploma have increased 43% since 1995-96, and since that time, there has been a 24 percentage point decrease in high school dropout rates. Enrollment rates at both 2- and 4-year colleges have almost doubled for students with disabilities since 1993, and more students with disabilities hold jobs after leaving high school than ever before.
One of the most striking facts is that over the past 20 years, there has been marked increases in employment, post-secondary education, and community living measures across all disability groups. Likewise, significant headway is being made in improving academic accomplishments and successes in an environment of heightened standards and expectations.
an American idea. Today's child will be tomorrow's citizen. Education shapes our expression of liberty. And separate, well, that has never been equal. We are the students of a new day, brave scholars who claim desk and classroom, book and school, until the self-evident truths expressed through our victories gave this nation's first declaration renewed life. Each mind is beautiful. Strength has many forms, and we are all able.
All right. You get out of there. All right, are we back in business here? Okay. All right, so the video is a little outdated, but I love it because I think as we talk about how to make things better, it's really important to know how far we've come. You know, a lot of people have done a lot of work to make things better, and there's a lot of work still left to do. So let's jump into it. Whoops, sorry, my screen is, there we go. All right, well, first let's just talk about what a SELPA is, because the CAC is part of the SELPA. And the short answer is that a SELPA is a special education local plan area that's unique to California. So if you go to other states, you won't find SELPAs. This is a unique mechanism through which California serves special education students. So it's a group of districts, charter schools, remember this term LEAs, so local education agencies, who come together to provide special education and related services to students with disabilities. Some districts are so big, like Oakland and San Francisco, that they are their own SELPA. They have enough, so many students to serve that they are their own entity. The North Region SELPA, as you all know, is 5 member districts: Alameda, Albany, Berkeley, Emory, and Piedmont. And so together, those districts share resources and work together to create a range of placements and services and bring resources together so that all the children can be appropriately served in the region. I won't show the video of how the SELPA works, but if you are interested in learning more, I wanted to include the link. Some details about the SELPA. So the California legislature implements requirements of the IDEA, that's the law we just heard about, right? The Special Education Law, IDEA, through something called the California Master Plan for Special Education. And there are key areas that are covered that the SELPA is involved in. And these are child find, that responsibility to identify and evaluate students who may need services, to provide that free, appropriate public education, to make sure that that's provided in the least restrictive environment, to make sure that due process rights of parents, that notice of parent rights that so many of us just kind of say thank you and don't read, really important document, to make sure that those notices are given to parents and that people can understand what their rights are. SELPAs are often involved in helping resolve disputes and work together with districts and families to try to come to some agreement about how to get through a disagreement or a conflict. And then, of course, SELPAs are responsible for helping develop or overseeing the process, I should say, of the IEP. So in California, in the state, in the country, IEP stands for Individualized Education Program in the actual law, but people tend to use the word plan just because there's so much planning involved. Also remember, and they covered this in the video briefly, especially those of you who have younger children, that in California, no later than age 16, there's supposed to be a transition plan in the IEP. And this it couldn't be more important, because the vision of the IDEA is not that your child gets through one year to the next year to the next year. Our goal is to make sure that children have future educational, employment, and independent living opportunities. So the transition plan is very, very important in that process. All right, so now we can talk about the role of the SELPA administrator. And for us, this is Katie. Hi, Katie. I'm putting you on the spot. This is just right off the CDE's website. The SELPA administrator is responsible for assuring that everyone all students with a disability receive a free appropriate public education in a least restrictive environment, that all regular education resources are considered and where appropriate utilized on a local or regional basis, that there's a system for child find and for placing students, that a viable system for public education is functioning in the community with broad participation and interaction with everybody, not just a few people. For an annual compliance monitoring system implemented to assure, this is something Katie can talk about, but there's processes where the state asks the districts and the SELPA to do its own verification and monitoring of itself. And sometimes there are focused monitoring efforts by the state and so on, and the SELPA is very involved in that process. And so there's a lot going on at the level of the SELPA, in addition to which, there's the whole funding conduit, right? So it's making sure that the money is flowing. And is it still true, Katie, that the Albany is still our funding entity?
Correct.
Right. So we have these 5 districts, and Albany for many, many years, as long as I've been around, and I'm old, has been the sort of conduit through which the state funding comes through to our SELPA. All right, let me stop here and just make sure there aren't any comments or questions about what we've talked about so far.
There is a comment or a question in the chat, and Caroline, I wonder, you might be able to speak to it more eloquently. I'm not sure if this is the time to go into it, but maybe let's just have it be spoken so it's kind of on our minds for how we manage our time.
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. So first of all, thank you so much for showing the video. It's really, you said it best. It's amazing to see how far we've come. And it made me a little emotional being a kid in the 70s, from being a kid who grew up in the 70s and 80s, I should say, to see how really unequal education used to be and how students with disabilities were just completely excluded. But there was a piece in the video that spoke to disproportionality that made me think of a situation that Alameda is dealing with currently, with the disproportionality of African-American students in special education. So as Kelly said, I wasn't looking to stop the training to discuss this now, but if we have time at the end, if we could talk a little bit about Larry P. law and how IQ testing for African-American students is prohibited as part of assessments for special education, and how there really has been no guidance or the development of an accessible substitution for IQ testing for assessing African-American students in special education. I think that this is a contributing factor could be a contributing factor to some of the disproportionality we're seeing in certain districts in the SELPA. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think that it's a really important topic, and it could be a whole training. So just to be clear, and I've been part of the Alameda group and watching that process in which, Alameda, like many other districts, by the way, it was found to be disproportionate in terms of over-identifying more than you might expect, more Black students, and in particular categories of special education. That to me is always very important to talk about. I'm going to come back to this if that's okay, but I will say that this is one of the things when you're reviewing a local plan is that you look at that system for how we deal with those numbers and what do we do if we see red flags about that.
Thank you.
So we'll come back to that, but you raise a really, really important point, which is how do we identify kids in culturally appropriate ways, and then that's part of that child find responsibility, right? And yet avoid targeting certain groups, whether we mean to or not, for special education, or not understanding their needs because we don't identify them for special education because we can't use certain tests. So it's a hot topic in special ed. All right. So let's get into what the CAC is. So California State Education Code requires that every SELPA have a CAC and that a majority of the members are parents. And that's part of what, I know Kelly, you've been working so hard on this year, and some others, and all of you who volunteered to actually be voting members. are doing is really trying to increase that participation and so on. So I thought I would just quote from what it's dated, right, Katie? I think it's 2011, but it was written as the CAC handbook by a very diverse group of educators and parents. So CACs are at the heart of special education in California. They provide the vehicle, the way that we do this, for active community involvement in the development and the review of the local plan. The local plan, again, just it's the roadmap for how each SELPA is going to deliver on the federal and state requirements. And to bring about positive change in the education system at both the local and state levels, CACs are a vital component of effective special education programs in California. They are commissioned by law, and they are a reflection of the community they serve. So it's, again, a diverse group. It shouldn't just be parents and educators. We want young people coming. We want adults with disabilities coming, and so on. I think, that those are things that we can work on as goals in the CAC. So that's the sort of philosophical underpinnings. What are your specific roles and responsibilities? And I always like to give the ed code. So here it is, if you want to look it up. The CAC shall have the authority and fulfill the responsibilities that are defined for it in the local plan. And so these responsibilities include, but don't have to be limited to this, and that's important language, right? This includes all of these. Advising, notice the word advising, the policy and administrative entity, the SELPA, regarding the development, amendment, and review of the local plan. It's going to review and consider comments from the CAC as it develops that local plan. Also, one of your really important roles is helping the SELPA recommend annual priorities. What's important to us, to this community, to this region. Every SELPA is serving a unique group of people. Again, you have to meet your legal obligation under the law, but there's often a variety of ways to do that. Assisting in parent education and in recruiting parents and other volunteers to contribute to the implementation of the plan, encouraging community involvement, supporting activities on behalf of people with disabilities, with exceptional needs. And this is something that, for example, in the past, Katie has organized the Legislative Awareness Day, right? Is that the right term, Katie? Where Legislative Action Day, is that right? Where,
information.
Thank you. Gone up, and literally met with state legislators to talk about, could you fund special education? Like, why are we putting our districts in this horrible position where we tell them that they have to do X, Y, and Z, and then we don't give them enough money to do it? How can we support students more effectively? Making sure that we are involved in parent awareness about the importance of regular school attendance. This is actually part of the CAC's mandate, is to help families understand how important this is. And I could talk forever about attendance as a special ed issue, and I won't here. But I think it's really important that when there are barriers around school attendance that are related to disabilities, that parents learn how to bring that up and get help. Because we know that kids who attend school regularly just have far better outcomes. And then, encouraging community involvement. So those are some of the specific responsibilities. And now I just want to leap into, and let me make sure I'm giving myself a good time check. I want to leap into what the local plan is supposed to be. So the local plan for special education is, like I said, it's kind of a roadmap. It says, we have these legal requirements from the federal and state government. How are we going to implement them within our SELPA? It's developed and updated cooperatively by a committee of representative special and general education teachers and administrators selected by the groups they represent. So the CAC is one group, but it's not the only group who's looking at the local plan, and that's important to know. It includes the participation of parent members from the CAC or of parents selected by the CAC. So it is possible for people who are not voting members to be involved in this if they're selected. SELPAs are responsible for making sure that there is adequate and effective participation and communication about, our local plans coming up for renewal, and we want to seek input and so on. And then beginning July 1st of 2020, so just last July, a SELPA has to review its local plan at least once every 3 years. And Katie, remind me, it used to be like 7, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is new. And I think it's administratively hard because it takes a lot of time to get this done, but I think it's really an important and positive change because it's the situation. Think about, COVID-19 hit and none of us had any idea that this would come up and we would do it, but we've learned so much now about emergency planning. And so, including that in our next local plan is something, that we can do. So things change on the ground as time goes by. I wanted to give you some examples, and my friend at Oakland Unified, full disclosure, I told her I'd give her credit. Her name is Cynthia Molina, and she's one of their family equity folks, and has a son with a disability. Sent these to me because their CAC recently reviewed the local plan, and so they had memorialized what their contacts and concerns were. And so I wanted to share them because I just thought, it's really helpful for me when I'm learning new things to see examples of what the issues that the groups raised were. So when the local plan talked about what, the requirement to provide free and appropriate public education, the CAC in Oakland said, had these comments. It's often the case in our district that a teacher with an intern emergency credential or a substitute is teaching in a special day class with students with 3 different grade levels and different skill levels and goals. We must work to reduce this practice. So, how can we do that? How can we talk about that as part of the local plan? And so this is one example. And again, I won't take time to read. I think it's horribly boring to have people read to me, but just to give you another example that you can have to look at, they asked the question to this SELPA director, what are our district's regulations for language and communication access? Which documents, including assessment plans that are mentioned in our local plan, are provided in the primary language or mode of communication of the parent and guardian? How far in advance before a meeting? What is feasible and not feasible in our particular district? And then they made a recommendation. And again, remember, you're advising, you're not setting policy, but you're providing input. If IEP documents aren't provided in the language or mode of communication of the parent, they must be provided at the meeting. And then the meeting must be devoted to reviewing the documents with the parent to make sure they understand it. So this, one of their concerns, and of course, Oakland is such a diverse community, was that people are signing IEPs they can't even read. So that was one of the issues they were raising. It's like, we literally have a meeting, we have an interpreter at the meeting, but the evaluations are often 30, 35 pages and they aren't translated. And then we try to explain it to the parent as best we can. And then we say, do you agree, will you sign? And they haven't had a chance to even read it in their own language yet. So that was one of their concerns. So I raise those as we go through some of this. It's a little bit dry, you guys, sorry, talking about what's in a local plan, so that you can be thinking, your job is to raise these big picture issues. How does that work? What about in our community, we're seeing X, Y, and Z, how would we address it? And really, that's where your input comes in. You're bringing the voice of the families and the community to Katie, so that as she's going through this process, including with the districts and other entities, she has your input, and it's really valuable. And I know that Katie really values it. So every SELPA has a local plan. It's got these specific requirements. It has to make sure that early intervention is available. And then every SELPA has an administrative unit. Again, that's Albany in our region. And so I put some links in just to provide more details about that. But let's talk about what's required to be in the plan. So first of all, the local plan includes federal, state, and local requirements that are called local plan compliance assurances. Basically, this is where the local plan says this is how we're following the law, that we are compliant. And these compliance assurance statements are approved by the State Board of Education, and they can't be rewritten at the local level. They are what they are. Every district board of trustees and the SELPA governing board, which is the member districts who meet regularly, adopt these federal compliance assurances. And then what the SELPA does is in the local plan is write local specific procedures for each of these federal requirements about how it's going to fulfill those requirements. That's where the CAC comes in. So I'm going to skip this for right now, actually, and just go, well, let me pop back here and go down to this last bullet point. So we review them every 3 years. We update them as necessary. There are requirements around revisions, and as you go through the process, if you're reviewing a local plan. You know, Katie will be taking the lead on explaining all of this to you. And I'm going to show you what I think is our most current waiting to be approved local plan in just a minute. The local plan must not be implemented without the approval of the County Office of Education and or the California Department of Education. So if the County Office of Ed says, you know, this local plan doesn't fly, the SELPA can file an appeal to overrule that. But basically there are generally these two entities, at least for a regular public school district, that are looking at it. So it's going through various levels of review, and the CAC review is one of them. So let's talk about what's actually in the dang thing. And this is where that Oakland feedback, you can see, you know, what they were responding to. First of all, you have to have a section describing how you're going to provide free and appropriate public education in your SELPA. How you're going to make sure there are full educational opportunities for children with disabilities. How you're going to conduct child finds. You know, how are you going to let pediatricians in the community know? Or what about kids in private schools? How are they going to know? The whole section on the IEP itself, a section on least restrictive environment, a section on procedural safeguards. These are all the rules about, you know, what happens if you have a disagreement or there's a violation of a compliance problem where they're not following the law, you know, what a parent's rights and options are for problems, evaluation, and confidentiality. So these are some of the sections. It's long, so you see. There's a description about how Part C transition is. So Part C, just so you know, people often, because of the way we do things in California, don't understand that the little ones, our babies, 0 until they turn 3, who are served by regional centers, they're being served under the federal IDEA. It's just that Part C is the baby part from 0 until 3. So starting at 3, the school district in California the kids transition from regional center services to the school district if they qualify for services. But Part C is that early intervention piece. There has to be a section about private schools. There's a section about local compliance assurances, and so on, you know, personnel qualifications, performance goals and indicators, and so on. There's also information about maintenance of effort. This is something I'm not going to get into, except to briefly say that one of the things that the state monitors and the federal government monitors is whether there's a consistent effort to provide support. And so if you see a big change where all of a sudden, you know, the funding and services for students in a certain category or certain group or in a certain district change, that's kind of a red flag. Public participation. This is really important. In Oakland, they had a whole meeting about this, suspension expulsion policies. You know, what do we do for students who are suspended but have an IEP? What do we do if we're expelling a student? They're still entitled to a free, appropriate public education. The district is still required to provide that, even if they're expelled students. So it has to describe how those requirements are going to be met. Access to instructional materials, and this is an interesting one because I think more and more we're learning that instructional materials include things like Chromebooks and things like that. The issue of over-identification and disproportionality, the prohibition on mandatory medication. You know, we get a lot of calls about this at DREDF where parents feel like a teacher, and often this isn't coming from special ed staff who generally know this, but a teacher will say, you know, you should get your kid medicated. He just can't focus. And, you know, it's not required that a student be medicated in order to come to school. You know, distribution of funds and data. So as you can see, there's a lot packed into this local plan. Other parts of the services of the plan that are included are regionalized services. So for example, there might only be a few students who are both deaf and blind. And so it may be that the SELPA just, you know, has coordinated services to identify one program that can serve those students and regionalize those services. So they're not unique to each district. They're, you know, they're combining resources, and sometimes it's even outside the SELPA itself. Dispute resolution, again, how are we going to solve problems and so that people don't have to necessarily, you know, go to due process if there's a way to resolve it at the local level, how money's going to get distributed, and descriptions of services and so on. So the local plan is chock full of critical information, And it's a lot. And I think it's a lot because for most of us who are involved in the CAC, we're not experts on budgets. We don't know the IDEA. This is why the participation of community members who are, attorneys or service providers or experts on inclusion, all those people are so valuable because we're all relying on each other to figure this out. And there's a lot of information here that most of us are not experts on. We also need to include information about early childhood special ed services, so that 0 to 5 group, what we're going to do about non-public schools, how we're going to use them in our SELPA, how we're going to evaluate them. And I just will say quickly that this has been a big problem during the pandemic, is that I think the districts have all been, and this is not a North Region SELPA issue, this is across the board, so busy just trying to figure out how to serve the kids who enrolled in the regular public school, that a lot of kids in non-public schools who are placed there by their district have not had the kind of oversight about what's happening for them. And I think there's been a lot of lessons we've learned about how important it is to monitor these non-public schools. Just because you place a child in a non-public school because you say, we can't meet this child's needs, and so we really feel like this other program will be more appropriate and everybody agrees, doesn't mean the school district is no longer responsible. It's not like you just went and enrolled them in a private school. There's still public school students enrolled in this placement for a reason, and the district still has some responsibility. And then the other thing, obviously, is the CAC review of the plan, verification that the plan has been reviewed by the CAC and that you have at least 30 days to make the review prior to submitting the plan to the superintendent. So I just want to stop here and say, think about everything I just covered and how much is in this plan. 30 days is not very long. So, ideally, and I think, part of the problem, as with all things where there are timelines involved, is that, the SELPA is trying to meet a whole bunch of legal requirements and meet not just with the CAC, there's or review it, there's other stakeholders involved here. So there's so many moving pieces, but if the CAC is reviewing the plan, to me, there's probably nothing else the CAC is going to do that month but work and meet regularly on reviewing the plan and making sure that everybody's voice gets heard. And that's a big time commitment for you all, but I think it's so important just to realize. You always tell people, you don't have to, everything I just covered, you don't have to know it, right? You just have to use your own basic experience and critical thinking skills to just say, help me understand what that means, or that part wasn't clear to me, or, could we do X, Y, Z differently? And again, you're advising. You're not saying this is what we, are requiring the SELPA to do. Not at all. What we're saying is, okay, we looked at what you're proposing. Here's our questions. Here's our concerns. And so I just want to, and I have the slides from Oakland just as you guys move forward if you want to see all of their comments, because I think it's, it's an interesting case study. Specialized equipment and services is an important component of the local plan. Things like specialized trikes and equipment that maybe just a few children might need. So maybe one district, buying that equipment would be really, really difficult, but we can share those resources together. And if one kid at one school needs them, and then there's another child that needs it, they're available to share. Okay, so again, and this is not in any way meant to be a criticism of the local plan process in the past. The North Region CAC has worked really hard over many years to review the local plan. I think what we're just trying to do is make sure that people are as fully informed as possible, because we don't want people to sign something. It's the same exact thing that we see with an IEP. You should not sign something you don't understand. It doesn't serve anyone to not understand it. So when Katie says, I want your input, she really means it. What's your input? I want to show that as SELPA director, I sought out this input, we considered it, we reviewed it, and so on. So it's not just that you say, well, I'm a CAC member, I have the local plan, I'm just going to sign it, just like you shouldn't do that with an IEP. It's really important to understand and participate in the process. So Katie, I'm going to pull up what I think is the one that's pending approval, and you tell me, because I had to go fishing around to find it and I might not have the right one, but I just wanted people to see what the darn thing looks like. All right, So is this the one that you're, to your knowledge, that we're currently getting approved, Katie?
Yes.
Thank you. And you can see just how much work has gone into it. Let's see if I can scroll down. So you can see there's all these sections, what LEAs, education agencies participated, what the administrative unit is. I know I'm scrolling kind of fast. I'm trying to get to the meat here, or the tofu. You see all this section B about governance and administration. And again, this is just explaining how our SELPA is going to implement the requirements of the law. You know, these are all the things that go into this. So you can just see what an incredible amount of work it is.
Cheryl, as you're scrolling, can you tell us why it starts with section B?
Good question. I do not know. Katie, is there a section A?
Yeah, section A is a set of contact information and certifications.
Okay. So that's not something that's typically posted as part of the plan?
Yeah, it's all new, and maybe it would end up getting posted, but my understanding currently is that it's not required, although it might become required. But the CAC certification is a part of section A.
Okay, thank you. That's really, really important to know. Good question. Carolyn, you have a question?
I do. Sorry, it took me a minute to get to the mute button. So I think it's a little bit difficult for someone who's maybe not in this training, who's looking at the local plan, to not see that as incomplete, because you covered that the local plan covers sections A, B, C, and D. I think there was an E, I can't remember, but this seems to only show section B in its entirety. So I guess two questions: where are the other sections? How come they weren't posted? And if the intent is to not to include them all, then should there be like a cover letter or something that comes before this that explains what is posted and why, so no one walks away thinking this is just not complete?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll let Katie answer that, because, you know, for me, you know, what I did was I wanted to actually let you guys see the working document that's currently under consideration. And Katie, remind me, is it already approved by the county and now at the CDE, or where is it in the process?
Correct. It's with the CDE.
Okay. So would it be, go ahead.
Section B is. Section C is about probably going on 2 years late. We should see it next year from the CDE as they revise their forms. Section D and E are both posted under governance along with section B. And we're about to revise and amend section D and E.
Okay, so when you say they're posted, do you mean like on the SELPA website?
Correct, under governance.
Okay, and one actual suggestion I have, I don't know how hard it would be, but it would be to actually, because when I went looking, I was looking for the local plan and I didn't know to look in governance. Maybe that's just me, but I think it'd be great if we could tag it a little bit and make it, you know, easier to sort of navigate to the local plan. If that's what you're looking for, you might not see it on the webpage as easily.
We also have a section called local plan, and the section B is under that. And so as we get the new section D and E, it's on our list to do exactly what you're saying.
Okay, great.
I'm just going to call on myself really quick to say, so is it true then if there's sections waiting or like pending approval, then are we still operating under the previous plan, in which case I would think those should also be posted so we could see what is governing us currently while something is pending in process for approval?
We got advice at the county approval level to swap it out.
So I think, Kelly, what you're asking is, even if it's swapped out, it should either be the old version or the new draft version, but it shouldn't be nothing posted. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, we can continue to, we can think about, this is just my personal opinion, and we can see if the CAC has an opinion about what, you know, in terms of advising what would what would be most helpful to the community members to be able to have access to. That might be something we could think about going forward.
And I could send the old one out.
You know, that might be a really helpful sort of learning tool, Katie, if you wouldn't mind, because then they would have and if you could send the complete draft with all the sections that are done, that are sort of under review, so that people could see like how a plan does change and evolve over time.
So there is a section B under review. That's it. So I will send the previous local plan like as a PDF. Does that sound good?
That sounds great to me. Everybody, thumbs up.
So am I understanding it right? Like there's all these A, B, C, D, however many it goes in the alphabet, and then certain sections get reviewed and updated at certain times. So, so when you say I'll send the whole plan, that's all the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
The A, B, C, D, E, and it stops there.
Okay.
New last year. Prior to that, it was one document. And I can send a link to that document.
Right.
The A, B, C, D, E was a total overhaul
In
that
2020.
got started in 2020.
Got it. That's so helpful to know. Thank you.
Right. And I think it's important to know too. I mean, so in addition to everything else that's been going on in 2020, we've tasked ourselves to, totally update the local plan. And that's one way in which I hope the CAC can support Katie too, is to be responsive and provide input, in a timely way, and to support you, Katie, as you're going forward with all of this, because it's a lot. It's very administratively complex, it looks like to me. And it's not like this is the only thing you're working on at any given time, I imagine, right? So you can see here, so I'm on, page 12. For example, this is a section on full educational opportunity. So what they do is they cite the federal law. So you see that USC, that stands for United States Code. Is that right, Jennifer? I'm not a lawyer, but I think I have that right. So that's the federal actual part of the IDEA law itself. You could actually go Google that and read that whole section and what it says. And then what it does is it ties a policy or procedure, to it. So how were we implementing that? And this is the statement. For example, it shall be the policy of this LEA. So each district is filling this out separately, right, Katie? And then the SELPA puts it all together. That all children with disabilities have access to educational programs, non-academic programs, and services. So for example, nobody can say we're doing a 3-day environmental education field trip, but your kid can't go because they have a one-on-one aid. Right? That's what this policy is all about. So all those educational opportunities.
Can we get the clarification on that from Katie? Does each district have a separate way they're handling it, or is that coordinated through the SELPA?
This is all at a SELPA level.
Okay. So there's uniformity across all LEAs around how they address this in our SELPA.
The policy is at a SELPA level.
Right. So my understanding is that at the nuts and bolts levels, there can be differences, and it's something I think that the CAC community could bring back to Katie. Hey, we're a little concerned because suspension in our district is X, Y, and Z, and here it's somewhere else, and one board decided that they're not going to suspend for things like just willful defiance or something, whatever it's called, when a kid just says, no, I won't do it. And another one still is. And so there's some uniformity issues. Those are things that, could be brought back to be discussed, but the policy itself should be the same in terms of this statement that you see right here, that regardless of how you're doing it, you're going to make sure that every kid has access to educational programs, non-academic programs. That can include things like after-school programs and things like that, if they're funded by the district or part of the district, then they should be open to all students. And you see that with Child Find too. And these are pretty brief statements, and they're very broad. It's not like this is where you find all the nuts and bolts. In fact, sometimes as an advocate, what I do is when I think there might be a problem is I'll say to the particular school district, do you guys have any policy and procedure manual that you use for suspension, you know, because every district will have its own, like how it does it on the ground. And that isn't really covered in this broad statement. As long as the district is consistent in following this broad statement, you know, they've met their responsibilities. That doesn't mean that gives you all the information that you might want. So you might, for example, say, gee, I'm going to contact Katie at the SELPA to see, because my child's being suspended and I think there's an issue. And she might say, well, here's what the rules are for the SELPA. And then you might say to the district, can you show me like how you implement this? Do you have policies and procedures? How do you train staff? You know, then you're working with your district to figure out how it's actually playing out in real time for kids. So that helps you know what questions to ask. So you see these statements, and they're tied to policy that you can just look up and read. Board policy 6164.4 is all about full educational opportunity. I'm sorry, child find. So these are all the statements that you're looking at. And this is why I actually felt like it was super helpful to see those Oakland slides, because you can just see how the discussion about something that's relatively brief, how the community brought and you know, enriched that discussion based on its feedback about what really happens on the ground for families. So you can go through this plan. I want to make sure we have enough time to finish up, but I have it here. I know that Katie is more than happy to, you know, to answer questions about it, you know, down the road. And I appreciate those action steps, Katie, of sending out the PDFs of the new and the old, because I think it's great to be able to compare them side by side. All right, let's see if I can get back here. Okay, so I also, again, I wanted you to have examples of what these sections look like. So here is what Section A looked like in another district, so that you can see it. This is Santa Clara SELPA. I'm really good at Googling and finding things that other people have posted. This is San Francisco Unified Special Education Local Plan, what their section looks like. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because I really want to make sure we can get to questions, and I also know that we want to get as much feedback as possible. If any of you need to leave early, please, please, please. I know, Kelly, were you just going to send it out, the link to the evaluation form? Or put it in the chat?
I was going to put it in the chat at the end, but then I was also going to email it to everybody, so they'll have 2 ways to complete
Perfect.
it.
All right, so please take a minute and fill that out, because I think it's important for the CAC to be making sure that we're responsive to the training needs of the community. So I gave you a bunch of links, including some of the things that I cited during this training, but I want to stop here and just say, you know, let's talk about this process. And maybe I want to open it up, Kelly, with letting you kind of guide the discussion as the CAC chair about whether there are particular issues or concerns or comments or questions you have having gotten this information.
Yeah, one of the things that's coming forward through via direct chat is just wanting to circle back around to talk together about the availability of the materials on the website to the public around this, and maybe if we could just understand a little bit more the logic around why the full plan that we're currently operating isn't accessible, or at least some members weren't able to find it, and what like the drafts of, because that's what if I'm understanding it right, that's what we're currently operating on until the new sections are approved. Is that?
So at the county review that happened a couple months ago, I was directed to swap out the 2 plans, because prior, the 2012 plan had been up there as the placeholder. Does that answer the question?
No. Caroline, can you clarify the question?
I would be happy to.
Thank you so much.
So the question is, we only have section B on the website right now. So if you look at the examples that Cheryl showed from other districts, those plans seem to start from section A, and I would imagine they include all of the sections. The plan that is posted on the SELPA website only includes section B, and there's
Okay.
no explanation for that. So if one were to go in there and look at it, they would think they were looking at the whole thing, but it's not the whole thing. So I
Okay,
understand what you're saying, Katie, about the fact that you were instructed to swap out the old plan for the piece that's available. But I feel like there needs to be more disclosure around what people are seeing when they click on that.
okay, got it. So section B, D, and E are up. And what you're asking, I believe, is for section A that was submitted. Is that correct?
Not quite. So when you click, if you go to the North Region SELPA homepage and you go down to the bottom to that link that says local plan, when you click on that, only section B comes up.
Got it. Okay. So we want everything that, because this is actually is governance, and we are revising the section that says local plan only. And we also have governance. Everything is under governance. And I understand that not everything currently is under the picture that says local plan. Is that what you're saying? Okay, yes, this is a part of our revision as it's evolving, and we're continuing to get direction. So as I said prior, it is on our list to integrate and have the whole enchilada in one place that is more obvious. That's on our list for our website, correct?
And
So
that's great. But if someone clicking on that today isn't going to know that, right? Someone
Right.
clicking on that local plan now is going to get section B and think they have the whole thing. And that's not the whole thing.
That's correct. And that's why I'm saying we are going to make it more accessible. It's all up there, but we will make it more accessible, if I'm understanding correctly. Because I understand if somebody goes into the local plan picture, they get section B.
Maybe I think, and Carolyn, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I wonder too if what you're asking is if they just say, there could be some note on the website saying other sections, you know, will be posted shortly or under review or whatever, for more information, contact or something, so that it just sort of flags people in some way that it's not that this is the whole plan, but that this is the current plan as approved with other sections pending.
Or just take down the link or something, because you're not giving the full information to people and they don't know that they're not getting the whole thing. If someone doesn't know that the local plan consists of 5 parts and you only post 1 part, they think they're getting the whole thing. So I understand what you're saying about updating the website, and that's great. But until that happens, someone going there today is going to get 1 part of a whole plan and not understand they only got 1 part of a whole plan.
Got it. I got it.
Thank you. And I don't mean to beat a dead horse. Thank you.
I got it.
Yeah, somebody, well, are there any other comments about that? Okay. Somebody also
I
asked.
agree with Carolyn.
Who's speaking? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It was Amelia.
Thanks, Amelia. Yeah, I mean, I think that part of the value of what the CAC brings to the SELPA is that voice from a parent on the ground going, how would I know that? Like, you might think I know that, but actually the average parent just looking at this wouldn't know that. So that's exactly the kind of input that you bring to Katie, which is, you know it, and the county knows it, and like everybody who's sort of in the know about it knows this, and the CDE is changing their requirements, and there's all these new sections. But the everyday parent who says, I wonder what, I just found out about this local plan thing, I'm going to look at it, they won't necessarily know that. So we just want to make sure that it's as transparent and as possible, and that all the information is as complete as possible. And if it's not complete, it sounds like what you guys are saying is, let's flag that it's not complete, just so that people will know.
Cheryl, we have 2 questions coming in, and then I think we should take public comment.
Yes.
One is about, and I actually, the direct question is, would it be possible for us to ask or require our 5 districts to put their policies and procedures on their websites or our SELPA's websites? And I guess I have a kind of follow-up question about that, or that. So I wanted to make sure I understand it, right? SELPA sets the policies for each of these bullet points, but how a particular school district implements those, that's unique to each school district. So I think this question is getting at, like, how can we be notified, or can we as a SELPA require that information is publicly accessible? And then the second question is, how does the local plan relate to the local control and accountability plan?
I saw that question, and that's a great question. So let me start with the first one. I think, remember, this is public in the sense that every school district has both board policy, they shorten it with BP, and they have administrative regulations that implement those board policies. Katie, if I'm getting this wrong, please jump in. And those are posted, and generally what the districts do is post it on the website using this thing called GAMUT, G-A-M-U-T, where it's sort of posted at the state level. You can go and look to the link for, Berkeley Unified, and you can see what its board policies and its administrative regulations are related to everything, not just special education. It's the first thing I tell a parent when they call me up and they say, I think that they're not doing the right thing. I think they're not following the law. I'm like, have you asked for their board policy? Like, you can yourself ask. Well, you're saying that you must suspend for X, Y, and Z because it's required by board policy. Can you send me the policy? You always want to see it in writing. And then that allows you to take that board policy and compare it to the SELPA requirements and the state requirements, and raise, concerns. And so, for very quickly, an example might be, my kid's being suspended because he brought a squirt gun to school, because they said there's policy that says that any child who brings a weapon or something that looks like a weapon to school must be suspended, and these XYZ steps happen. And then it turns out that actually the board policy says one thing, but if you look at the state requirements, it might say it has to look substantially like a gun. Here's pictures, here's guidance. There's a lot more there. So those are the kinds of situations that we get into, but always starting with what are the board policies. So one thing, Katie, would be and it's hard because this isn't just special education. Board policy and administrative regulations aren't just that each district posts, cover everything in the world and not just special education stuff. And so to post all of their board policies and administrative regulations on the SELPA website is very overwhelming. But I think just some kind of statement on the SELPA website, you can contact your own district to get copies of the board policies or something like that might be helpful. And then the second question, how does this relate to the local plan and accountability formula? Katie, will you weigh in on that? Because it's actually something that I think a lot of people have questions about and aren't clear about. And it's one of the big equity concerns, right? So if we're thinking about our LCAP plan to support students maybe in foster care, or students who are homeless or unhoused and things like that, how does that relate back to the local plan for the SELPA?
So not I guess an indirect relationship with the local plan. However, there is a requirement that's new that makes perfect sense, which is to require the districts to consult the SELPA on the activities and goals in their LCAP. So that started about 1.5 years ago.
So do we send someone from the SELPA to LCAP meetings, or how does that information flow back and forth?
I go. Currently, it's me going to their structured meetings. It doesn't have to be that way, and I'm looking at other practices in other SELPAs, but currently, that's what's happening.
Right. So I know in a couple of other SELPAs that people take turns going, and you just make sure there's always coverage. And anytime the LCAP is meeting to revise the plan or update it or see how it's going, that, you know, you always want someone who's kind of representing the special education voice to be part of that, because students with disabilities are a section of the population that has some of the poorest outcomes relative to other groups. And there's a lot of important intersectionalities, right? So Black students with a disability are the single biggest group most likely to be suspended in many districts. And so, you know, having those hard conversations at the level of the LCAP is really important. I think that's a great thing to follow up on. I'm looking at the time though, and I want to make sure you can get your public comment in. Kelly, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. So I would like to open the floor to the public for comments about items not on the agenda, which is the local plan, the CAC's role in understanding and advising the local plan. You can raise your hand using, if you open up the participants list under, or you can
just talk,
unmute yourself, and then we can hear you.
I couldn't raise my hand for some reason. I don't know what's going on with my stuff. It just allowed me to unmute myself or rename myself. And I was like, what's going on? Anyways, yeah. So my question is, I hate when that happens to me, but my question specifically is, as for, let's say you're a parent with a disability and you have to read through all of those pages because you really, really want to know what is in every single one of those pages. And you want to be able to make valuable input as a voting member or just a member of the CAC in general. Is there going to be some sort of resource for those that have that type of disability? Let's say with some sort of comprehension or something like that. So when they're reading, it's like, how can I get that, you know, fully? Like, is there
we're not
someone
allowed to comment, right? Are we allowed to comment on this, Kelly, or are we just supposed to listen?
Well, you know, I've seen different boards handle that differently. So I think if you have, I think if you have a comment on that, I'd like to hear it.
I just wanted to say it's really important, and this is something I've been beating my drum about in many districts lately, to make sure that on the SELPA website too, that there are accessibility statements. And, you know, if you need help understanding this, here's who you could reach out to, because Allah raises a really important point, which is that we need to model what we're fighting for our kids, which is making sure that all of our information is accessible. So whether it's, you know, what is it called? Yeah, text to voice, right? Am I going the right direction? I can never remember. Or whether it's, you know, the opportunity to sit down and review. So Katie, I don't know if there is, I actually can't easily navigate to the website right now, but is there like a bold accessibility statement on that front page somewhere? And if not, could we make sure it gets highlighted?
I've written down the advice. Yes. I'm making a list.
Okay. Because you didn't have enough to do, right? Okay, others?
I just wanted to say thank you, because, you know, I know that there's a lot of parents that may have disabilities themselves and they still want to be informed for their own children. And so it's very hard to have a disability and then trying to advocate for your child with a disability when you don't know where to go, what to learn, or when you finally figure it out, you can't understand what you're learning. So I just think it's really important, you know, so thank you so much for allowing my question and comment to be heard.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I'll make, just as a member of the CAC, my own public comment, which is that I really want to urge us to pay attention to linguistic diversity as well. These things are hard enough to understand in English, but, you know, let's make sure that we have at least, you know, some access or information for families that says, if you need this translated, you know, let us know.
So there was a so moving from that item on the agenda back to the CAC discussion, there was a question that came up around what are some other, given that the local plan is only under review every 3 years, what are some other ways that you've seen, Cheryl, across as you've worked with CACs in the land, that CACs are able to give meaningful advice and kind of have an impact in between those processes of the local plan approval?
Well, remember, this is at a minimum, right? So if, for example, like one of the things I've been recently concerned about is we have this new requirement under Senate Bill 98 that every IEP has an emergency plan now. This is a brand new requirement. And at some point, I think I reached out to Katie a few months ago to say, can you, what's the form look like or whatever? And Katie was like, we're still figuring it out because it just happened. But that's to me an indication of where we would need to update our local plan because the law changed. We need to put a new requirement in there and maybe an example. And so I don't think there's anything that stops us from revising any element of the local plan more frequently. Is there, Katie?
Can you say that again? Sorry, I was reading the chat.
It's okay. I said the question is, based on my understanding, there's nothing that says that if it needs to be revised or updated because the law changed or something is substantially different. There's nothing that would say you have to wait for 3 years to do that, right?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Because I actually think that emergency plan section is a place where, I know a lot of families, for example, were frustrated that they just got mailed the emergency plan without an IEP meeting. And maybe not everybody wants an IEP meeting, but some people felt really strongly that, like, how can you update it and include it without giving me an opportunity to participate since I've been doing all the instruction at home or monitoring of the instruction at home. So I think there, it is supposed to be at a minimum, but I think raising the question of, how can we, is there a need right now? I mean, that to me would be a CAC role. Is there a need to update or revise the plan in light of some things that are happening in our community or in our state, or even in this case, in our country? It's a really important thing to raise. I have to laugh at some of the captioning mistakes on Google captioning. It's done a great job in general, but there's definitely a few inappropriate words here and there. I don't know why that always happens, but there's something about sexualized a few slides back. We'll have to make sure we look at the captioning and take that off, Kelly, because
yes, some of the acronyms too are a little funky. So in terms of what you just said, Cheryl, that process for revising it, and Katie, maybe you can weigh on this too, like how does that get decided for that to begin? And yeah, because I'm just imagining too, like if let's, to use your example, Cheryl, the emergency provisions, right? It could just say like, could the SELPA set a standard of like what's minimally required there, right? Because for example, in my kid's IEP, it just said, we'll provide it to the best of our abilities. And so the thoughts about that, like, is that something that the SELPA can set as like a policy standard of like the minimum of what's required, and then the districts can take it from there to kind of interpret that?
I think that is a complex discussion that would warrant its own topic, because there are so many facets to the SB 98 requirements for an emergency plan in an IEP, what districts did with distance learning plans, regardless of what they called it, and then the capacity and variety of capacities in each district to provide and to continue to provide. So I would say that is not something I can give a yes or no answer to. So far, what I can say is the SELPA signs up for the requirements of SB 98, whether it is in a local plan, a policy, or not, it's the law. So not every single special education related law is in the local plan or is in a policy. We can choose to reinforce one ourselves. And the CDE, you'll notice they have a variety of them in the section 2 of what Cheryl went through, which is policy, procedures, and programs. And they've selected out key ones that have to do with the LRE and the FAPE. It's possible the CDE will come through and say, we're adding in the piece around SB 98. We anticipate changes to section B coming from the state next year. So starting to make a list of concerns, items in our own SELPA would be a relevant thing to do. I don't know if I answered.
Right, I guess I would just add, so notice that this says that these are the required sections of the local plan. That doesn't mean that the SELPA couldn't add additional ones, right? These are the required ones. They must be in there. So
I can ask that question next week. There's still a lot of clarification going on, even with section B, and we're going to do a lot of clarifying with section D and E next week. I can ask that question. It's a great question. I am not sure that they want additional. And so in that case, if there's something this SELPA or CAC would like to recommend, you can recommend something in a policy. But I can put that on my list to ask next week of the CDE.
I know we're really bumping up against time, so but a clarifying question, when you say you're not sure if they would want extra, who is the they in that?
The CDE, they are the ones that create the template, the requirements, and exactly everything that you saw in the document that Cheryl went through. It's all formulated, and they want the responses that are typed in, especially in the first section of section B, are probably different SELPA by SELPA, but particularly that policy part where the laws are reinforced. And it's possible also when they come out with their requirements for section C on assurances, possibly we would also see assurances that this will be followed, that will be followed, and could include SB 98.
Yeah, and I would just point you to that second bullet point, and I should have said that I added the last sentence example, SB 98, but if you look, this is straight out of the SELPA local plan guidelines, and it says, I bolded it, a SELPA may be required to amend the local plan at any time a change is deemed necessary due to local changes, new legislative requirements, a new interpretation by the court, or an official finding of non-compliance with the law. In such cases, a revised local plan must be submitted in accordance with CDE guidelines. So Katie, I think it would be so great if you could ask that question and come back and report to the CAC, how that relates.
Yeah, great. Because this isn't just our SELPA. This is for every SELPA in California.
Every single one. Yeah. Yeah.
So out of respect for your time, Cheryl, and everybody here today, thank you so much. And there's so many more questions, and we can continue to think about forums around how we can come together and brainstorm and learn more from the experts we have available to us. But I want to thank you on behalf of all of our voting members. Thank you so much for taking your time this morning to be with us, and as well, Katie, you as well. And thank you all members and public for being here. This is our first step to becoming more educated and able to advocate and advise more judiciously and effectively. So thank you all. We'll figure out how we're going to get this posted and the transcript posted. So stay tuned and enjoy the rest of this beautiful Saturday. And we'll see you in April.
Hi, everybody. My dog is happy. I'm going to take him on a walk now.
Bye.
Care,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you, Katie.
Right.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, you guys. Have a good day.
The eval was in the chat.